Tycoon marries his new bride, but his pregnant ex-wife shows up as a waitress with a shocking secret. "Mr. Chen, your mother is on line 1. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. Marcus closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and picked up the phone. "Mother. Marcus. Darling, have you confirmed the final guest list? The Vanderbilts simply must be seated away from the Astors. You know how they've been since that nasty business last summer." Mrs. Chen's voice dripped with carefully cultivated sophistication. "Everything is under control, Mother. Isabella's wedding planner has handled all the arrangements." His voice betrayed a hint of weariness that his mother chose to ignore. Standing up, Marcus walked to the window, his reflection showing a man who seemed to have everything sharp features, success written in every line of his bespoke suit. And yet his eyes held something else, something that looked remarkably like doubt. "Isabella right?" he whispered to himself after hanging up. The name felt foreign on his tongue, even after 6 months of engagement. She was perfect on paper, Harvard-educated, from one of Boston's oldest families, and beautiful in that polished way that graced society magazines. His phone buzzed with a text from Isabella. "Darling, don't forget our final tasting at the resort at 3. The chef is flying in from Paris just for us. Kiss Mark." Marcus slipped the phone back into his pocket, his hand brushing against a small, worn photograph he couldn't bring himself to throw away. He didn't need to look at it anymore. He knew every detail by heart. A candid shot of a woman laughing in a kitchen, flower on her cheek, dark curls escaping from a messy bun. "Sophia." "Mr. Chun." His assistant interrupted his thoughts. "Your car is ready for the resort inspection, right?" He straightened his shoulders, slipping back into the role of the powerful tech tycoon everyone expected him to be. The wedding of the year awaits. As he stepped into the elevator, his reflection multiplied infinitely in the mirrored walls, each one showing a man who had everything he was supposed to want, and nothing he truly desired. "Time to make the Chun family proud," he muttered, as the elevator descended, taking him closer to what everyone assured him was his perfect future. "You can't be serious, Marcus." Sophia's voice cracked, her dark eyes wide with disbelief. The rain outside her small restaurant kitchen matched the storm brewing inside. "After 3 years, you're just ending it?" Thunder crashed outside as Marcus stood rigid, his expensive suit out of place among the well-worn pots and pans that had witnessed their love story unfold. "The board is considering me for CEO, Sophia. My family, they have expectations." His words felt like ashes in his mouth. "You have to understand." "Understand what?" Sophia slammed down the knife she'd been using to chop vegetables. "That I'm not good enough for the mighty Qin Empire because I'm just a chef? Because I didn't go to the right schools or know the right people?" The pain in her voice cut through him like a blade. He watched as she unconsciously touched the small jade pendant he'd given her on their 2nd anniversary, a family heirloom his grandmother had pressed into his hands with a knowing smile. "It's more complicated than that," he whispered, but even to his own ears, the words sounded hollow. "No, Marcus, it's actually very simple." Sophia's voice turned quiet. "Dangerous. You're choosing your family's approval over love. Over us." She pulled off the jade pendant, the chain catching slightly in her hair. "Here. Give this to someone who fits your family's expectations." The pendant felt cold in his palm, its weight far heavier than it should have been. "Sophia, please. Get out." Her voice trembled but held firm. "Your driver's waiting, isn't he? Wouldn't want to keep him in this rain." He stepped toward her, one last time, but she turned away, her shoulders shaking slightly. The industrial kitchen, usually warm and filled with the aromas of her experimental recipes, felt sterile and cold. As he reached the door, her voice stopped him. "You know what's funny, Marcus? I actually thought love would be enough for you to stand up to them." Back in the present, Marcus blinked as his driver opened the car door. The memory of that night clung to him like a shadow, and somewhere in his chest, the jade pendant seemed to burn against his skin, still carried in his inner pocket, a constant reminder of what he'd thrown away. His phone buzzed again. Isabella, sending pictures of wedding flower arrangements. But all he could see was Sophia's face in the rain, and all he could hear was the sound of his own cowardice walking away from the only real thing he'd ever known. "To the resort, sir?" his driver asked. "Yes," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. "To my future." But even as he said it, he couldn't shake the feeling that his future had already slipped through his fingers on that rainy night in a small restaurant kitchen. "No, no, no," she whispered, sliding down to sit on the cold tile floor. Her chef's uniform hung on the door, the name tag, Sophia, catching the morning light. "This can't be happening." She pulled out her phone, Marcus's number still memorized despite being blocked everywhere. The automated message played again. "The number you are trying to reach is no longer in service." "Coward," she muttered, one hand unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach. The morning sickness that had plagued her for the past week suddenly made terrible sense. Her best friend Maria's voice came through the speakerphone. "Sophia, did you take it?" "It's positive, Maria." The words felt surreal leaving her lips. "I'm carrying his child, and he doesn't even know I'm trying to reach him. That bastard changed his number, his email, everything. Even his social media is private now." Maria's voice crackled with anger. "Want me to hack his company website?" Despite everything, Sophia laughed softly, though it sounded more like a sob. "And risk your IT job?" "No thanks." She stood up, catching her reflection again. "Besides, I saw the society pages. He's engaged now, to someone suitable." The silence on the other end was heavy with understanding. "What are you going to do?" Maria finally asked. Sophia's eyes hardened with determination as she looked at herself in the mirror. "I'm going to protect this baby from feeling unwanted, like I did growing up. We don't need him." Her phone pinged with a notification, a job listing that made her breath catch. Experienced waitstaff needed for exclusive mountain resort wedding. Long-term position available. The same resort where she knew, from the society pages she'd been torturing herself with, a certain wedding was to take place in 8 months. "Sophia?" Maria's voice brought her back. "You've gone quiet. What are you thinking?" Sophia touched her stomach again, a plan forming in her mind. "I'm thinking it's time I served up a dish best served cold." She opened her closet, pulling out the loose-fitting black server's uniform from her catering days. It would hide a growing belly perfectly. Her hand brushed against the chef's coat Marcus had custom-made for her last Christmas, with Chef Martinez chin embroidered on the pocket. A promise now turned to ashes. "The universe has a twisted sense of humor, little one," she whispered to her unborn child. "But maybe it's also giving us a chance to write our own ending." The morning sun streamed through her window, catching the tears on her cheeks and turning them to diamonds. In that moment, Sophia Martinez made a decision that would change not just her life, but the lives of everyone involved in the upcoming wedding of the year. She picked up her phone one last time, dialing the resort's number. "Hello? Yes, I'm calling about the waitstaff position." Her voice was steady, betraying none of the storm raging inside her. "My name is Sophia Martinez, and I have extensive experience in high-end service. The Swarovski crystal centerpieces need to be exactly 32 inches high," Isabella declared, gesturing dramatically. "I want them to catch the light just so when Marcus and I have our first dance." She paused, catching her reflection in one of the floor-to-ceiling mirrors. Perfect blonde hair, designer outfit, engagement ring that could blind a small aircraft. Everything society expected of the future Mrs. Chun. Yet something in her eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. "Miss Wright," Amanda ventured carefully, "about the guest list. Did the Rothschilds confirm?" Isabella's voice carried a sharp edge. "Yes, but there's something else. Your father called. He's requesting some additional seats at the main table." Isabella's perfectly manicured hands clenched slightly. "Of course he is. More business associates to impress, no doubt." She turned to face the window, overlooking the resort's pristine gardens. "Do you know what my father said when Marcus proposed, Amanda?" He said, "Well done, princess. You've secured the merger." The bitterness in her voice hung in the air for a moment before she straightened her shoulders, mask firmly back in place. "Miss Wright, The new waitstaff is arriving for training today. Would you like to? No need, Isabella waved dismissively. Just make sure they understand the importance of discretion. This wedding will be in every major publication. One wrong move, one leaked photo. She left the threat hanging. Her phone chimed, a message from Marcus. Stuck in meetings. Can't make the menu tasting. Trust your judgment. Isabella stared at the message, her perfectly painted smile faltering slightly. Third time this week, she murmured. We could reschedule, Amanda suggested. No, Isabella's voice hardened. Everything stays on schedule. This wedding will be perfect. It has to be. She walked to the elaborate mood board displayed on an easel, photos of flowers, table settings, and in the center, a magazine photo of her and Marcus at their engagement party. They looked perfect together, like two pieces of an expensive puzzle. But if you looked closely, you could see that neither of their smiles quite reached their eyes. Amanda, Isabella said suddenly, do you believe in love at first sight? The wedding planner looked up, startled by the personal question. Because I don't, Isabella continued, touching the diamond on her finger. I believe in careful planning, strategic alliances, and living up to expectations. Love is for fairy tales and people who can't afford to care about share prices. A commotion outside drew their attention, the new service staff arriving for training. Through the window, Isabella watched them file in, all in identical black uniforms. For a moment, she envied their simplicity, their anonymity. Well, she straightened her Chanel jacket. Shall we continue with the seating arrangements? The Chun family has very specific requirements about who sits where, but as she turned back to the task at hand, she missed seeing one particular new staff member, a dark-haired woman who walked with careful grace, her uniform just loose enough to conceal a secret that would soon shatter Isabella's perfectly planned world. Martinez, the head server, Mr. Reynolds, barked. Table settings for the Chun-Wright wedding rehearsal dinner. Show me what you've got. Sophia moved with practiced precision, her hands steady despite her racing heart. Each piece of silverware, each crystal glass placed exactly as she'd learned in her years of high-end catering, before she'd opened her own restaurant, before Marcus. Impressive, Reynolds nodded. You'll be assigned to the main table tomorrow night. The fork in Sophia's hand trembled slightly. The main table, sir? Problem with that? His eyes narrowed suspiciously. No, sir. Sophia forced a smile, though her stomach churned and not from morning sickness this time. Later, in the staff locker room, she pressed her forehead against the cool metal of her locker, taking deep breaths. You okay, honey? Older waitress named Rose touched her shoulder. You're looking a bit pale. Sophia straightened up, meeting Rose's concerned gaze in the mirror. Just tired. These double shifts. Rose's eyes flickered knowingly to Sophia's midsection. And I suppose that little secret you're carrying has nothing to do with it. Sophia's hand instinctively went to her stomach, panic flashing across her face. Don't worry, Rose whispered, checking to ensure they were alone. I've been doing this job for 20 years. I know how to spot things. And how to keep secrets. She paused, studying Sophia's face. Though I can't help but notice you arrived right when the Chun-Wright wedding preparation started. Sophia's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. I needed the job. Honey, Rose's voice was gentle but knowing. Nobody needs a job at the exact resort where their ex is getting married. Not unless they're looking for something more than a paycheck. A kick from within made Sophia gasp softly, pressing her hand more firmly against her belly. Active little one, Rose observed. How far along? 5 months, Sophia whispered. He doesn't know. Her voice caught. He made sure I couldn't tell him. Rose's expression hardened. The father? Sophia nodded, unable to speak. Well, Rose straightened Sophia's name tag with motherly care. Tomorrow's rehearsal dinner just got a lot more interesting. She reached into her locker and pulled out an extra apron. This one's cut better for concealment. You'll need it at the main table. Why are you helping me? Rose's eyes took on a distant look. Let's just say I once served at a wedding where I should have been the bride. Sometimes the universe gives us a chance to right wrongs. even if it's not in the way we expected. The sound of approaching footsteps made them both straighten up. Sophia quickly wiped her eyes as other staff members filed in. "Remember," Rose whispered, "keep your head high tomorrow night. You're not just serving dinner, you're serving justice." And from what I can see, she glanced meaningfully at Sophia's concealed bump. "You're not the only one with a stake in how this plays out." As if in agreement, the baby kicked again, and Sophia allowed herself a small, determined smile. Tomorrow night, the real show would begin, and she had a front-row seat, or rather, a serving position, to what promised to be an unforgettable performance. "What am I really doing here?" she whispered to the empty room, her internal conflict finally bubbling to the surface. Her hands trembled as she opened her journal, where she'd been documenting her thoughts since taking the job. "Dear little one, tomorrow I'll be standing feet away from your father, serving wine I can't drink at a table where I should be sitting. Is it selfish to want him to know about you? Is it cruel to potentially ruin his perfect society wedding? Or would it be more cruel to let you grow up never knowing why your father chose status over love?" A soft knock interrupted her writing. Rose entered with a cup of chamomile tea. "Couldn't sleep either?" the older woman asked, settling into the room's only chair. Sophia closed her journal. "I keep asking myself if I'm doing the right thing. What if I'm just being vindictive? What if you're protecting your child's right to know their father?" Rose interjected. "What if you're standing up for yourself and every other person who's been told they're not good enough for someone else's family?" Sophia's hand moved to her stomach as another kick punctuated Rose's words. "But what right do I have to disrupt his life? He made his choice." "He made a choice without all the information," Rose countered, her eyes fierce. "And from what you've told me, his family made that choice for him." Sophia stood, pacing the small room. "Sometimes I imagine just walking up to him, showing him the ultrasound, and—" She trailed off, tears threatening to fall. And sometimes I imagine him choosing us," Sophia admitted quietly. "But then I remember his mother's face when she first met me at their family dinner. 'A chef,' she'd said, like I was something stuck to her designer shoe." Rose set down her teacup with a decisive clink. "Listen to me, Sophia. Tomorrow, when you're serving that table, remember this: you're not just a waitress with a secret. You're a mother protecting her child's future. That makes you the most powerful person in that room." Sophia touched the ultrasound photo again. "What if he sees me and makes a scene? What if Isabella recognizes me from the society page's coverage of Marcus's restaurant investments?" "Then you hold your head high," Rose said firmly. "You're not the one who should be ashamed." A sharp kick from the baby made Sophia gasp and laugh despite her tears. "Someone seems to agree with you." "Smart kid," Rose smiled, standing to leave. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be interesting." Alone again, Sophia returned to her journal. "Maybe the truth is, little one, that this isn't just about your father anymore. It's about refusing to let anyone make us feel less than we are. It's about showing the world that love doesn't have a price tag, and family isn't measured by bank accounts or social status. Tomorrow we make our stand. Together." She placed her hand on her growing bump, feeling the strong kicks of her child, their child. And for the first time in months, she felt not just anger or hurt, but a fierce, protective determination. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she whispered to her unborn child, "know that you are loved, you are wanted, and you are worth fighting for." The moonlight caught the tears on her cheeks, but these weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of resolution, of a woman who had found her strength not in spite of her pain, but because of it. 500 of the world's most influential people, Amanda announced, checking her tablet. 3 former presidents, 12 Fortune 500 CEOs, and enough old money to buy a small country. Isabella stood before a full-length mirror in the bridal suite, her Vera Wang gown catching the light like fresh snow. Yet her fingers wouldn't stop fidgeting with the pearls at her neck. "Miss Wright," her personal assistant called softly, "your father wishes to speak with you." Richard Wright entered, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud in an Armani suit. "Princess, you look acceptable." His eyes narrowed at the pearl necklace. Though I thought we agreed on the diamond choker from Cartier. Mother's pearls felt right, Isabella replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Nothing about this wedding should feel. He spat the word like it was distasteful. It should be calculated. Perfect. The Chun family. The Chun family that Isabella suddenly burst out. Did anyone bother to ask what Marcus and I want? The sharp crack of Richard Wright's hand against the dressing table made everyone jump. Want? He leaned in close. What you want is irrelevant. This merger, this wedding will secure the Wright family's position for generations. Your children will, if we have any, Isabella muttered, then immediately regretted it as her father's face darkened. Meanwhile, in another wing of the resort, Marcus stood at his own window, watching helicopters land with late-arriving guests. His brother James adjusted his tie in the reflection. Last chance to run, James joked weakly. Marcus didn't laugh. His hand unconsciously went to his pocket, where Sophia's jade pendant seemed to burn through the fabric. She's here, he said suddenly, making James freeze. Who's here? Sophia. I saw her yesterday in staff uniform. I thought I was imagining things. But... He turned to his brother, panic rising in his voice. She's working the wedding. James's face paled. Does Isabella know? Does Mother? No, but... Marcus stopped as their mother swept into the room. Darling, the Vanderbilt's helicopter just landed. Do try to look less like you're attending a funeral. Mrs. Chun paused, studying her son's face. Marcus? What's wrong? Nothing, he said quickly, but his eyes betrayed him. Darting to the service entrance where staff members were filing in for final instructions. Through the door's window, he caught a glimpse of dark curls, a familiar profile, and something else, something in the way she moved that made his heart stop. Impossible, he whispered. But even as the word left his lips, he knew. He knew with a certainty that shook him to his core. The jade pendant seemed to grow heavier in his pocket as the wedding march began to play distantly, calling him to his carefully orchestrated future while his past walked among the shadows, carrying what appeared to be an earth-shattering secret. It's time, Mrs. Chun announced, either ignoring or missing her son's distress. 500 guests are waiting. The future of our family's legacy begins now. Marcus straightened his tie, a man walking to his own execution. As he moved toward the ceremony, he caught one last glimpse of Sophia disappearing into the service corridor, her black uniform now seeming less like a disguise and more like an omen of the storm about to break. Martinez, Mr. Reynolds hissed, Table 1 needs their first course. Sophia's hands trembled slightly as she approached with the carefully plated appetizers. Mrs. Chen's eyes swept over her with the casual dismissiveness reserved for service staff, then suddenly narrowed. You look familiar, Mrs. Chen said, causing Sophia's breath to catch. Many of our staff work high-end events, Madame, Sophia replied smoothly, the practiced lie tasting bitter on her tongue. As she leaned forward to place Mrs. Chen's plate, the baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly strong kick. Sophia straightened quickly, but not before catching the sharp intake of breath from James, Marcus's brother, who was seated next to his mother. His eyes widened in recognition, then dropped to her midsection, then back to her face. Understanding dawned in his expression. Oh God, he whispered, barely audible. Is something wrong, dear? Mrs. Chun asked her younger son. No, Mother, James replied, but his eyes remained locked on Sophia, who continued serving with mechanical precision, her mask of professionalism firmly in place. As Sophia moved around the table, she felt James's gaze following her. When she reached his place setting, he spoke under his breath. How far along? Enjoy your meal, sir, Sophia responded quietly, but her hand instinctively moved to her abdomen, answering his question more clearly than words could. James's fork clattered against his plate, drawing curious glances. Marcus, he muttered, does he? Mr. Chun? Sophia cut him off, her voice steady but cold. Your soup will get cold. From across the table, Isabella's father, Richard Wright, studied the interaction with shrewd eyes. You, he called out to Sophia, I've seen you somewhere before. Sophia felt sweat bead on her forehead as she continued serving. "I doubt that, sir." "No, I'm certain." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through something. Rose appeared suddenly at Sophia's side. "Martinez, you're needed in the kitchen." As Sophia retreated, she heard James excuse himself from the table. The weight of his discovery pressed against her chest like a stone. In the kitchen's relative safety, she leaned against a wall, breathing deeply. "He knows," she whispered to Rose. "His brother recognized me." Rose squeezed her hand. "Then the countdown has begun." Through the kitchen swing doors, Sophia could see James in an animated conversation with Marcus's mother, whose face was growing increasingly pale. Mrs. Chen's head snapped up, her eyes searching the service staff until they locked onto Sophia with the intensity of a laser. "Sophia," Rose's voice was urgent. "Whatever happens next, remember why you're here." As if in response, the baby kicked again, a reminder of what was truly at stake. Sophia squared her shoulders and picked up the next course's plates. "Time to serve the main course," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. In more ways than one, the doors swung open, and Sophia walked back into the lion's den, carrying not just plates of food, but the weight of a truth that was about to shatter the carefully constructed facade of the wedding of the year. "Not now, little one," she whispered. "Please, not now." Mrs. Chun was still watching her like a hawk, whispering urgently to her husband. James kept glancing between his brother at the head table and Sophia, his face a mask of barely contained anxiety. As Sophia approached with Marcus's plate, their eyes met for the first time in 8 months. Time seemed to freeze. The chandelier light caught the tears threatening to spill from her eyes, making them sparkle like diamonds. "Your entree, sir," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. Marcus's hand trembled as he reached for his wine glass, knocking it over. Red wine spread across the white tablecloth like blood. "I'll get that," Sophia said automatically, bending to clean the spill. Another contraction hit, stronger this time, causing her to gasp audibly. "Are you all right?" Isabella asked, genuine concern in her voice. Before Sophia could respond, Mrs. Chun stood abruptly. "I know where I've seen you. You're that chef. The one who—" "Mother," James interrupted, "perhaps this isn't the best. The one who wasn't good enough for my son." Mrs. Chin finished, her voice carrying across the now-silent ballroom. Sophia straightened slowly, one hand pressed against her stomach. The baby was moving frantically now, as if sensing the tension in the room. "Sophia?" Marcus's voice cracked as he spoke her name, his eyes finally registering what everyone else had begun to notice. The careful way she held herself, the slight swell visible even through her uniform. Another contraction ripped through her, causing her to grip the back of Marcus's chair. "I'm fine," she insisted, but her face had gone pale. Rose appeared at her side. "You need to sit down, honey. Your water just broke." A collective gasp rippled through the gathering as a small puddle formed at Sophia's feet. The pain was becoming unbearable now, her carefully constructed plans crumbling along with her composure. "Someone call an ambulance," Isabella commanded, rising from her seat. "No," Mrs. Chun interjected sharply. "This is clearly a ploy to ruin." "Mother," Marcus finally found his voice, standing so quickly his chair toppled backward. "She's in labor." Sophia's knees buckled as another contraction hit. Before she could fall, Marcus caught her, cradling her against his chest just as he had done countless times before. "Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered, his voice breaking. Sophia looked up at him through tears of pain and emotion. "You made sure I couldn't," she managed between breaths. The baby kicked violently, causing both of them to gasp, Marcus because he could feel it against his arm, Sophia because it was accompanied by another crushing contraction. "The ambulance is 15 minutes out," Rose announced, her voice cutting through the chaos. "That's not soon enough," Sophia gasped. "This baby, your baby, is coming now." The words hung in the air like suspended crystal, shattering the last remnants of the perfect society, wedding into 1,000 glittering pieces. And in that moment, surrounded by 500 of the world's most influential people, Marcus Chun had to make a choice. one that would define not just his future, but the future of the child who had chosen this precise moment to make its dramatic entrance into the world. "Where's the nearest private room?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the din. Isabella, her face a mixture of shock and unexpected compassion, pointed towards a door. "The bridal suite is just down the hall." As Marcus carried Sophia out, followed closely by Rose and a frantically gesturing James, Mrs. Chen's shrill voice cut through the air. "Marcus Chen, you get back here this instant. What about your wedding?" Marcus paused at the doorway, turning to face the sea of shocked faces. His eyes locked with Isabella's, an unspoken conversation passing between them. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "But I have a more important commitment right now." Isabella nodded almost imperceptibly, a sad smile touching her lips as she watched her fiancé carry another woman away. In the bridal suite, Marcus gently laid Sophia on the bed, her face contorted in pain as another contraction hit. "I need to push," she gasped, gripping his hand with surprising strength. "No, not yet," Rose instructed, taking charge of the situation. "James, get some towels. Marcus, support her back." Marcus moved behind Sophia, cradling her against his chest. The familiar scent of her hair hit him like a tidal wave of memories. Lazy Sunday mornings, laughter in the kitchen, whispered promises in the dark. "Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered again, his voice cracking. Sophia turned her tear-stained face to him. "You left me, Marcus. You changed your number, your email. You made your choice." The pain and betrayal in her eyes cut deeper than any knife. Before he could respond, another contraction racked her body. "I see the head," Rose announced. "Sophia, push now." Sophia bore down, a primal scream tearing from her throat. Marcus held her tightly, murmuring encouragements he wasn't sure she could even hear. "One more big push," Rose coached. With a final, Herculean effort, Sophia pushed, and suddenly the room was filled with the piercing cry of a newborn. "It's a girl," Rose announced, tears in her eyes as she wrapped the baby in a soft towel. Marcus stared in awe as Rose placed the tiny, wriggling bundle on Sophia's chest. The baby's cries quieted as she nuzzled against her mother's skin. "She's perfect," Sophia whispered, her fingers gently tracing the baby's features. Marcus reached out tentatively, his hand shaking as he touched his daughter's cheek for the first time. "She has your nose," he said softly, his voice filled with wonder. The tender moment was shattered as the door burst open. Mrs. Chun stood there, her face a mask of fury. "Marcus, this has gone on long enough. Your guests are waiting." Isabella can speak for herself. Isabella's voice came from behind Mrs. Chun. She stepped into the room, her white gown a stark contrast to the emotionally charged scene before her. Isabella's eyes took in the tableau, Sophia cradling the newborn, Marcus perched protectively beside them, his hands still intertwined with Sophia's. She saw the love, the connection, everything that had been missing from her own relationship with Marcus. With a deep breath, Isabella stepped forward, removing her engagement ring. "I think this belongs to someone else," she said quietly, placing the ring on the bedside table. Mrs. Chun sputtered in outrage, but Isabella silenced her with a raised hand. "Mrs. Chun, I believe it's time we let your son make his own choices." As Isabella turned to leave, she paused at the door. "Congratulations," she said softly, her eyes meeting Sophia's. "She's beautiful." The door closed behind her, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. The baby cooed softly, oblivious to the life-altering drama surrounding her birth. Marcus looked down at Sophia and their daughter, then at the ring glinting on the table. In that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of his carefully planned life, he realized that sometimes the most precious things come in the most unexpected packages. "Sophia," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I know I have a lot to make up for, but if you'll let me." Before he could finish, another contraction gripped Sophia, causing her to cry out in pain. Rose's eyes widened in shock. "Oh my God," she exclaimed. "There's another one coming." "Another one," he whispered, his voice barely audible over Sophia's labored breathing. Sophia gripped his hand tighter, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and apology. I didn't know, she gasped between contractions. The doctor only ever mentioned one heartbeat. As if on cue, the first baby began to wail, sensing the tension in the room. James quickly scooped her up, cradling her awkwardly but tenderly. Twins, Mrs. Chun breathed, her earlier anger giving way to a complex mix of emotions. She stepped further into the room, her eyes never leaving the scene unfolding before her. Sophia, I need you to focus, Rose commanded, her voice steady despite the unexpected turn of events. This little one is coming fast. On the next contraction, I need you to push with everything you've got. Marcus positioned himself behind Sophia again, supporting her as she leaned into him. The familiarity of her weight against his chest, even in these extraordinary circumstances, brought a flood of memories rushing back. Flashback, twins run in my family, Sophia had told him once, late at night in her tiny apartment above her restaurant. They were curled up on her worn sofa, dreaming of their future. Really? Marcus had replied, nuzzling her neck. Well, double the trouble, double the fun, right? Sophia had laughed, swatting him playfully. Easy for you to say. You're not the one who'd have to carry them. Hey, he'd said, suddenly serious, taking her face in his hands. Whatever life throws at us, we'll face it together. Promise. Present. The memory hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd broken that promise, let his family's expectations and his own cowardice drive him away from the woman he loved. I'm here now, he whispered fiercely into Sophia's ear as another contraction built. I'm not going anywhere. We're in this together. Sophia turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze. In that moment, despite the pain and the chaos, a flicker of their old connection sparked between them. Push! Rose's voice cut through the moment. Sophia bore down with a guttural cry, her body shaking with the effort. Marcus held her tightly, murmuring encouragement. I can see the head, Rose announced. One more big push, Sophia. With a final Herculean effort, Sophia pushed, and suddenly the room was filled with the indignant wail of a second newborn. It's a boy, Rose exclaimed, quickly wrapping the baby in another towel. As Rose placed the second baby on Sophia's chest next to his sister, the room fell into an awed silence. The twins, as if recognizing each other, immediately quieted, their tiny hands finding each other. Marcus stared at his children, his son and daughter, with wonder and not a small amount of fear. They're perfect, he breathed, gently touching each tiny head. Mrs. Chun stepped closer, her earlier fury replaced by a softness few had ever seen. Oh, Marcus, she said quietly, they have your father's eyes. The mention of his late father seemed to break something open in Marcus. Tears began to flow freely down his cheeks as he looked at the family he'd nearly lost. The family he'd never known he wanted so desperately. Sophia, he began, his voice thick with emotion. I know I don't deserve it, but if you'll let me, I want to make this right. I want to be here, for you and for them. For all of us. Sophia looked up at him, exhaustion and a myriad of other emotions playing across her face. Marcus, she said softly, it's not going to be easy. We have a lot to work through. I know, he nodded, squeezing her hand. But I'm ready to fight for us this time. No more running. No more letting others dictate our lives. As if to punctuate his words, both babies began to fuss, demanding attention. Sophia and Marcus instinctively moved to comfort them, their hands brushing against each other as they did. In that moment, surrounded by the mess of shattered expectations and newborn cries, a fragile hope began to bloom. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with difficult conversations and trust to rebuild. But as Marcus looked at Sophia and their unexpected twins, he knew with absolute certainty that this beautiful, chaotic, imperfect reality was exactly where he was meant to be. Marcus, she said, her voice trembling, you need to see this. She thrust the phone towards him, and as Marcus took it, his face drained of color. On the screen was a live feed from the ballroom, where chaos had erupted. Guests were huddled around their own phones, murmuring in shock and disbelief. "What is it?" Sophia asked, trying to sit up despite her exhaustion. Marcus turned the phone so she could see. A series of leaked emails and documents were scrolling across the screen, each more damning than the last. They detailed a complex web of manipulation and deceit, orchestrated by both the Chun and Wright families. They planned all of this, Marcus whispered, his voice hollow with disbelief. The breakup, the engagement, everything. Sophia's eyes widened as she read snippets of the emails. "Your mother, she hired private investigators to follow me? And Mr. Wright, he orchestrated that big contract that took you away for months?" Isabella sank into a nearby chair, her wedding gown pooling around her feet. "I had no idea," she said softly. "My father always said this marriage, was for the good of both our families. But this..." Mrs. Chen, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. "It was necessary," she said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. "For the company, for our legacy necessary." Marcus's voice rose, startling the twins who began to whimper. He lowered his tone, gently soothing his newborn children as he continued. "You manipulated our lives, broke apart relationships, all for what? Stock prices? Social standing?" Sophia reached out, placing a calming hand on Marcus's arm. Despite everything, her touch still had the power to ground him. "Who leaked this?" James asked, breaking his stunned silence. As if in answer, the door opened once more. Richard Wright strode in, his face a mask of barely contained fury. "It was that damn waitress," he spat. "The older one. She's been working with some investigative journalist. They've been gathering evidence for months." All eyes turned to Rose, who stood quietly in the corner, a small smile playing on her lips. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the universe has a way of setting things right." The room fell into a tense silence, broken only by the soft coos of the twins. The weight of years of manipulation and deceit hung heavy in the air. Marcus looked down at Sophia and their children, then back at the phone still displaying the damning evidence. In that moment, he felt a clarity he hadn't experienced in years. "Enough," he said, his voice firm and resolute. He gently handed the twins to Sophia and stood up, facing the room. "This ends now. No more manipulation, no more schemes, no more letting others dictate our lives." He turned to Isabella, his eyes filled with regret and understanding. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "You deserve better than to be a pawn in their games." Isabella nodded, a sad smile on her face. "So do you, Marcus. So does Sophia." Marcus then faced his mother and Richard Wright. "Whatever fallout comes from this, we'll deal with it. But from now on, my family, Sophia, and our children, comes first." Mrs. Chun opened her mouth to protest, but Marcus cut her off. "No, Mother. It's time for you to listen. Really listen." As Marcus began to lay out his vision for the future, Sophia watched him with a mixture of pride and cautious hope. The twins, sensing the shift in energy, had settled contentedly in her arms. In the midst of this storm of revelations and confrontations, Sophia realized that the path forward would be challenging, filled with difficult conversations and trust to rebuild. But as she looked at Marcus standing firm in his convictions, at their unexpected twins peaceful in her arms, and even at the shocked faces of those who had tried to keep them apart, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't dared to feel in months. Hope. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like it might just be theirs to shape. "Sophia?" Marcus rushed to her side, alarm evident in his voice. Rose quickly moved to check on her, her experienced hands gently palpating Sophia's abdomen, her brow furrowed with concern. "She's hemorrhaging. We need to get her to a hospital now." The room erupted into frantic activity. Marcus scooped Sophia into his arms, the twins still cradled against her chest. "James, call the helicopter. Now!" As James rushed out to make the arrangements, Isabella stepped forward, her hands outstretched. "Let me take the babies. You need to focus on Sophia." For a moment, Marcus hesitated, the weight of everything that had happened making him wary. But Sophia's weak voice cut through his doubts. "It's okay, Marcus. Trust her." With a nod, Marcus carefully transferred the twins to Isabella's arms. The former bride-to-be cradled them gently, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. As they rushed through the resort's corridors, the shocked faces of guests and staff blurred into a haze. Sophia's breathing grew more labored, her skin taking on an alarming pallor. "Stay with me, Sophia," Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking. "You hear me? Stay with me. Our story isn't over yet." Sophia's eyes fluttered open, a weak smile playing on her lips. "Always so dramatic," she whispered. They burst out onto the helipad just as the chopper touched down. The wind whipped around them, drowning out the chaos of voices and the distant sounds of sirens. As the paramedics rushed to take Sophia, Marcus felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see his mother, her face etched with a mixture of concern and remorse. "Go," she said, her voice barely audible over the helicopter's roar. "Be with her. We'll take care of everything here." For a moment, mother and son locked eyes, years of unspoken words passing between them. Then Marcus nodded, squeezing her hand briefly before climbing into the helicopter. As they lifted off, Marcus held Sophia's hand tightly, watching the resort shrink beneath them. The twins' cries could be heard faintly over the comm system, Isabella's soothing voice trying to calm them. Marcus, Sophia's voice was barely a whisper. He leaned in close to hear her. If something happens to me, no," he cut her off fiercely. "Don't you dare say goodbye. We're just getting started, remember? You, me, and our beautiful surprise duo down there." A tear slipped down Sophia's cheek. "Promise me. Promise you'll always put them first. No matter what." Marcus felt his own eyes welling up. "I promise. But you're going to be right there with me. Okay? We're doing this together." As the city lights began to appear on the horizon, Marcus felt the full weight of the day's events crashing down on him. In the span of hours, his entire world had been turned upside down. The carefully constructed facade of his life had crumbled, revealing a truth both terrifying and exhilarating. He looked down at Sophia, her eyes closed but her grip on his hand still strong. Despite the fear coursing through him, he felt a sense of rightness he hadn't experienced in years. "We're almost there," he whispered, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Hold on, my love. Our greatest adventure is just beginning." As the helicopter began its descent towards the hospital helipad, Marcus silently vowed that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them head-on. No more running, no more hiding behind family expectations or societal pressures. The future was uncertain, filled with the promise of difficult conversations and bridges to rebuild. But as he held Sophia's hand, the mother of his children, the woman he had never stopped loving, Marcus knew one thing for certain. This was where he belonged, and he would fight with everything he had to keep this newfound family together. Hours crawled by, each tick of the clock amplifying his anxiety. The twins had been taken to the NICU for observation, their early arrival warranting extra precautions. Marcus paced relentlessly, his mind a whirlwind of fear, hope, and regret. A gentle hand on his shoulder startled him. He turned to find Isabella, her wedding gown exchanged for hastily borrowed scrubs. "Any news?" she asked softly. Marcus shook his head, his voice hoarse. "Nothing yet." The twins? Stable, Isabella assured him. "They're fighters, just like their mother." The word mother hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. Isabella took a deep breath, her eyes meeting Marcus's with unexpected warmth. "I saw them, she said. "In the NICU. They're beautiful, Marcus. Your daughter has Sophia's curls, and your son. He has your determined little frown." A choked laugh escaped Marcus's throat, somewhere between a sob and a chuckle. "I haven't even held them yet," he whispered, the reality of fatherhood crashing over him anew. Isabella squeezed his hand. "You will, and so will Sophia." As if summoned by her words, a doctor in blood-stained scrubs appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Chan?" Marcus's heart leapt into his throat. "Yes? How is she?" The doctor's face was carefully neutral, We've managed to stop the hemorrhaging, but Ms. Martinez lost a significant amount of blood. The next 24 hours will be critical. Marcus felt his knees weaken, gripping the back of a chair for support. Can I see her? She's in recovery now. You can have a few minutes with her, but she's still unconscious. As Marcus followed the doctor, Isabella called after him. I'll check on the twins. Go be with her. The recovery room was eerily quiet. The only sounds the steady beep of monitors and the hiss of oxygen. Sophia lay still, her skin almost as pale as the sheets surrounding her. Marcus approached the bed cautiously, as if afraid his presence might somehow disturb her fragile state. "Oh, Sophia," he whispered, gently taking her hand. It felt small and cold in his grasp. "I'm so sorry. For everything. For leaving. For not fighting harder. For letting others dictate our lives." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. "But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. You hear me, Sophia Martinez? You have to wake up. Our babies need you. I need you." Marcus's voice broke, tears streaming down his face unchecked. "We have so much left to do. So many adventures ahead. Remember that little bistro in Paris we always talked about visiting? And that cooking class in Tuscany you wanted to take? We'll do it all, I promise. Just please wake up." A soft knock at the door interrupted his vigil. A nurse entered, her expression sympathetic. "Mr. Chan, we need to run some tests now. But there's someone else who needs you." Confused, Marcus followed her gaze to the hallway, where Isabella stood holding 2 small bundles. "The pediatrician said they're doing well enough for some kangaroo care," Isabella explained softly. I thought their father should be the one to do it." Marcus felt his breath catch as Isabella carefully transferred the twins into his arms. For the first time, he truly looked at his children. Their tiny, perfect features, the soft wisps of dark hair, the way they instinctively curled towards each other. "Hello, little ones," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. "I'm your dad." As he held his son and daughter close to his chest, Marcus felt a surge of love so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. In that moment, despite the uncertainty surrounding Sophia's condition, despite the chaos of the day's events, he made a silent vow. "I promise you both," he murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to each tiny forehead, "that no matter what happens, you will always know how loved you are. By me, by your mother, by everyone who truly matters." He glanced back at Sophia's still form, his heart aching with the need for her to open her eyes, to share this moment with him. "Come on, Sophia," he pleaded softly. "Our family's waiting for you. Come back to us." As if in response, one of the twins, his daughter, he realized, let out a tiny, mewling cry. And in that sound, fragile yet determined, Marcus found a flicker of hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as a family. "Mr. Chun," she panted, "you need to see this." She thrust a crumpled envelope into his hands. Carefully balancing the twins, Marcus managed to open it. Inside was a DNA test result and a handwritten note. His eyes widened as he scanned the contents. "What is it?" Isabella asked, stepping closer. Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper. "It's a paternity test. And a letter from Sophia's grandmother." With shaking hands, he began to read aloud. "My dearest Sophia, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you've finally found the courage to open the box I left you. There's so much I should have told you years ago, but fear and shame kept me silent. It's time you knew the truth about your heritage. Your mother wasn't just a talented chef. She was the illegitimate daughter of Antonio Chun, Marcus's grandfather." Marcus paused, his breath catching in his throat. The implications of this revelation began to sink in. "That means," Isabella gasped, "Sophia and we're cousins," Marcus finished, his mind reeling. "But how? Why didn't anyone know?" He continued reading. "Antonio had a brief affair with my daughter during a business trip to Spain. When she discovered she was pregnant, he paid her to keep quiet and disappear. Your mother never knew the truth about her father, and I've carried this secret for decades. I'm sorry for the pain this might cause, but you deserve to know your true heritage. The DNA test enclosed will confirm everything. Love always, Abuela Elena. The room fell into stunned silence, broken only by the soft coos of the twins. Marcus felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Everything he thought he knew about his family, about his relationship with Sophia, had been turned upside down. This is why, he murmured, pieces falling into place. This is why my family was so against us being together. They must have known, or at least suspected. Isabella placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Marcus, this doesn't change who you are, or who Sophia is. It doesn't change how you feel about each other. He looked down at the twins in his arms, their innocent faces oblivious to the storm of emotions swirling around them. Despite the shock of the revelation, he felt his love for them, and for Sophia, only grow stronger. You're right, he said, his voice gaining strength. If anything, this makes everything clearer. All those years of feeling like Sophia was the missing piece of my family. She quite literally was. A soft moan from the bed drew everyone's attention. Sophia's eyelids fluttered, her fingers twitching slightly. Sophia? Marcus rushed to her side, still holding the twins close. Can you hear me? Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then locking onto Marcus's face. A weak smile tugged at her lips. Marcus, she whispered, her voice hoarse. The babies? They're right here, he assured her, gently lowering the twins so she could see them. They're perfect, Sophia. Just like their mother. Tears welled up in Sophia's eyes as she took in the sight of her children. We did it, she murmured. Marcus swallowed hard, knowing he had to tell her about the letter. Sophia, there's something you need to know. It's about your family, our family. As he began to explain, Sophia's eyes widened with each revelation. When he finished, a mix of emotions played across her face. Shock, confusion, and finally, a strange sort of relief. So that's why, she said softly, all those years, I felt this connection to your family, even when they were pushing me away. It makes sense now. Marcus took her hand, squeezing it gently. This doesn't change how I feel about you, Sophia. If anything, it makes me more certain that we belong together. You've always been my family, and now we know it's true in every sense of the word. Sophia's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were accompanied by a smile. We're quite the mess, aren't we? She chuckled weakly. The most beautiful mess I've ever seen, Marcus agreed, leaning down to place a soft kiss on her forehead. As the new family shared this tender moment, Rose and Isabella exchanged glances. The revelation of Sophia and Marcus's shared heritage would undoubtedly cause more upheaval in both families. But for now, in this hospital room, none of that mattered. What mattered was the love that had brought them all to this point. A love that had overcome manipulation, separation, and now even the surprising twists of DNA. As the twins cooed softly in their parents' arms, it was clear that this unexpected family had found its way home at last. Marcus, this has gone far enough, Mrs. Chun declared, her voice trembling with barely contained emotion. You need to come home now. We can fix this. Spin the story. Her words died in her throat as she took in the scene before her. Marcus and Sophia, surrounded by their newborn twins, a picture of familial bliss despite the sterile hospital setting. Richard Wright stepped forward, his face thunderous. Do you have any idea what you've done? The stock is plummeting. Years of careful planning, ruined in a single day. Marcus stood, gently passing the twins to Sophia. He faced the intruders, his stance protective. No, you don't get to come in here and make demands. Not anymore. He held up the letter from Sophia's grandmother. Did you know about this? Did you know that Sophia was family all along? Mrs. Chen's face paled, her eyes darting between the letter and Sophia. We suspected. Antonio always had a soft spot for that Spanish chef, but we never had proof. So you pushed us apart based on a suspicion? Marcus's voice was low, dangerous. You manipulated our lives, broke our hearts, all to protect your precious company image. Richard Wright scoffed. Oh, don't be so naive, Marcus. This merger was about more than just your love life. It was about securing the future of both our families. No, Isabella's voice cut through the tension. She stepped forward, still wearing the borrowed scrubs, her face set with determination. It was about power and control. Nothing more. Mrs. Chun turned to Isabella, a plea in her eyes. Isabella, dear, surely you understand. The pressures of our world, the expectations. I understand perfectly, Isabella interrupted. I understand that you were willing to sacrifice your son's happiness, to ignore the existence of your own grandchildren, all for the sake of appearances and profit margins. The room fell silent, the weight of Isabella's words hanging heavy in the air. Sophia watched the scene unfold, her arms tightening protectively around the twins. Marcus took a deep breath, his voice steady as he addressed his mother and Richard. This ends now. All of it. The manipulation, the lies, the endless pursuit of status and wealth at the expense of genuine human connection. He moved back to Sophia's bedside, taking her hand in his. Sophia and I were family in every sense of the word now. These children, he gestured to the twins, they're the future of the Chun legacy. And we're going to raise them with love, honesty, and integrity. Everything that's been missing from our families for far too long. Mrs. Chen's composure cracked, tears welling in her eyes. Marcus, please, you're my son. I only ever wanted what was best for you. Then start now, Marcus replied, his tone softening slightly. Be a grandmother to these children. Be a mother to me. Not just a CEO or a society matriarch, but a real mother who values family above all else. Richard Wright's face contorted with anger. This is absurd. You can't just throw away everything we've built. That's exactly what we're doing, Isabella interjected, moving to stand beside Marcus and Sophia. And we're going to build something better in its place. As if sensing the gravity of the moment, one of the twins, the boy, let out a piercing cry. The sound seemed to cut through the tension, reminding everyone of what truly mattered. Sophia spoke up, her voice weak but determined. Mr. Wright, Mrs. Chun, I know you may never fully accept me, but these children, your grandchildren, they deserve a chance to know their family. All of their family. Mrs. Chun stepped closer to the bed, her eyes fixed on the crying infant. Hesitantly, she reached out a hand, gently stroking the baby's cheek. The crying subsided, replaced by soft coos. He has Antonio's eyes, Mrs. Chun whispered, a mix of pain and wonder in her voice. For a moment, the room was silent save for the gentle sounds of the twins. Then, to everyone's surprise, Richard Wright cleared his throat. Perhaps, he said slowly, we've all been too focused on boardrooms and balance sheets. Maybe it's time to reevaluate our priorities. Marcus looked at his mother and Richard, seeing for the first time the toll that years of scheming and manipulation had taken on them. It won't be easy, he said. We have a lot to work through, a lot of trust to rebuild. But if you're willing to try, really try, then maybe we can create something beautiful out of all this chaos. As the first full rays of sunlight streamed into the room, illuminating this unlikely group, new parents, jilted bride, and chastened elders, there was a palpable sense of a new chapter beginning. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with difficult conversations and old wounds to heal. But in that moment, surrounded by the miracle of new life and the power of love that had overcome all obstacles, there was also hope. The Chun-Wright merger might have failed, but a far more important union had just begun, one built on honesty, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bonds of true family. Sophia stood at the kitchen window, watching as Marcus cradled their daughter, Aria, while their son, Matteo, was being fussed over by a surprisingly doting Mrs. Chun. The sight still felt surreal at times. Penny, for your thoughts? Rose's voice came from behind her, the older woman's presence a comforting constant over the past tumultuous months. Sophia turned, a soft smile playing on her lips, just marveling at how much can change in half a year. Sometimes I wake up thinking it's all been a dream. Rose chuckled, handing Sophia a glass of sparkling cider. Oh, it's real, all right. And from where I'm standing, it's a pretty beautiful reality. As they moved to join the party, Sophia's eyes fell on Isabella, deep in conversation with James. The two had grown surprisingly close in the aftermath of the failed wedding, bonding over their shared experience of family expectations and the desire to forge their own paths. "Sophia," Marcus called out, his face lighting up as he saw her. He made his way over. Arya snuggled contentedly against his chest. "There you are. Dad was just asking about your plans for the restaurant." Mr. Chun Sr. approached, his usual stern demeanor softened by the presence of his grandchildren. "Yes, I was thinking, perhaps it's time we discussed expanding your culinary empire. The Chun resources could be put to good use in the restaurant industry." Sophia felt a flutter of excitement mixed with apprehension. "That's very generous, Mr. Chun, but I wouldn't want any special treatment." "Nonsense," he interrupted, a twinkle in his eye. "It's not special treatment when it's family. And please call me Antonio." As the conversation flowed, touching on business plans and future endeavors, Sophia marveled at how naturally the two families had begun to blend. It hadn't been easy. There had been heated arguments, tearful confrontations, and moments when it all seemed on the verge of falling apart. But slowly, steadily, they had begun to rebuild. Richard Wright's booming laugh drew Sophia's attention. He was regaling Mrs. Chun and Isabella with a story, gesturing animatedly. The sight of him relaxed and jovial was a far cry from the tightly wound businessman of 6 months ago. "He's different when he's not trying to control everything," Isabella commented, noticing Sophia's gaze. "I think we all are." Sophia nodded, understanding the depth of what Isabella was saying. They had all changed, grown in ways they never expected. As the evening wore on, Marcus clinked his glass, calling for everyone's attention. "I'd like to propose a toast," he began, his voice carrying across the gathering. "To family, not just the one we're born into, but the one we choose and the one we build." He looked at Sophia, his eyes shining with love and promise. "To unexpected twists of fate that lead us exactly where we're meant to be. And to love that overcomes all obstacles, even the ones we put in our own way." Glasses raised. The group echoed, "To family and love." As the cheers subsided, Marcus pulled Sophia close, whispering in her ear, "There's something else I wanted to ask you." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Sophia's breath caught as he opened it, revealing a stunning ring, not a flashy diamond, but a delicate band inlaid with jade, reminiscent of the pendant she had once returned. "Sophia Martinez," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion, "we've been through more in the past year than most couples face in a lifetime. You've given me the greatest gifts I could ever ask for our children, your forgiveness, and a chance to be the man I always wanted to be. Will you marry me? For real this time, no schemes, no expectations, just us." The backyard fell silent, all eyes on Sophia as she looked at the ring, then at Marcus, then at their children in the arms of their grandparents. In that moment, she saw not just her past and present, but a future filled with love, laughter, and the kind of family she had always dreamed of. Sophia stood before an antique mirror, adjusting the delicate lace of her vintage-inspired gown. The dress was a far cry from the elaborate confections she'd once imagined wearing, but it felt right, a perfect blend of elegance and comfort, just like the life she and Marcus had built together. A soft knock at the door preceded Rose's entrance. The older woman's eyes glistened as she took in the sight of Sophia. "Oh, my dear," Rose breathed, "you look absolutely radiant." Sophia turned, a mixture of excitement and nerves fluttering in her stomach. "Is everything ready? The twins?" Rose chuckled. "Arya and Mateo are proudly fulfilling their roles as the world's most adorable ring bearers. Though I think Mateo might have eaten one of the flowers from his little basket." They shared a laugh, the sound easing some of Sophia's tension. As Rose helped with the final touches, Sophia's mind wandered to the journey that had brought them here, the pain, the revelations, the hard-won reconciliations. "I never thought we'd get here," Sophia admitted softly. "There were moments when it all seemed impossible." Rose squeezed her hand. "The best love stories always face the greatest challenges. It's how you overcome them that matters." A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, They could see Marcus attempting to wrangle a squirming Mateo, while Mrs. Chun fussed over Aria's dress. The sight of the once formidable Chun matriarch cooing over her granddaughter still felt surreal at times. "They've come so far," Sophia mused, watching the scene unfold. "We all have," Rose replied. "Now, are you ready to start the next chapter?" With a deep breath and a nod, Sophia made her way to the courtyard. As she stepped into view, a hush fell over the gathering. Marcus stood at the end of the aisle, his eyes widening as he took in the sight of his bride. Sophia's gaze swept over the assembled guests, Isabella and James, hands intertwined. Richard Wright, looking relaxed in a linen suit. Antonio Chan, proudly holding Aria. Each face represented a piece of their complex, beautiful story. As she reached Marcus, he took her hands in his voice thick with emotion. "You look incredible. Not so bad yourself," Sophia teased gently, noting how handsome he looked in his tailored suit. The officiant, a local magistrate, began the ceremony in lilting Italian, with an English translation following. As they exchanged vows, Sophia and Marcus infused their words with the weight of their shared history and the promise of their future. "Sophia," Marcus began, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes, "I promise to love you not just in spite of our differences, but because of them, to cherish the family we've created and the legacy we're building together, to face every challenge as a team, knowing that our love is stronger than any obstacle." Sophia's voice trembled slightly as she responded, "Marcus, I vow to stand by you through every twist and turn life throws our way, to nurture our love with the same care and passion I bring to my cooking, to always remember that our story, complicated as it may be, is the most beautiful one I could have ever imagined." As they sealed their vows with a kiss, cheers erupted from the gathering. Aria and Mateo, caught up in the excitement, began to giggle and clap, their joyous sounds adding to the celebration. The reception that followed was a blend of cultures and traditions: Sophia's Spanish heritage, Marcus's Chinese background, and the Italian setting, creating a tapestry of flavors, music, and laughter. As the evening wore on, Sophia found a quiet moment alone, watching as Marcus danced with Aria perched on his feet, while Mateo attempted to mimic his father's moves nearby. The sight filled her heart with a joy so profound it was almost overwhelming. Isabella approached, handing Sophia a glass of champagne. "Congratulations," she said warmly. "You know, a year ago I would have never believed this is where we'd all end up. But seeing you all together, it just feels right." Sophia nodded, clinking her glass against Isabella's. "Life has a funny way of working out, doesn't it?" As they stood there, watching the celebration unfold, Sophia felt a sense of peace wash over her. The road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, balancing family life with her expanding restaurant empire, navigating the complex dynamics of their blended families. But she knew they were ready to face whatever came their way. The sun began to set over the Tuscan hills, casting a golden glow over the gathering. Sophia caught Marcus's eye across the courtyard, and in that moment, surrounded by the family they had fought so hard to create and preserve, she knew that this was just the beginning of their greatest adventure yet. "Mama, Papa's home," Aria's excited voice rang out, followed by the patter of small feet. Sophia smiled, wiping her hands on her apron as she turned to see Marcus enter, Mateo clinging to his leg like a koala while Aria danced around them. "How was the board meeting?" Sophia asked, leaning in for a kiss. Marcus's face was a mix of exhaustion and triumph. "We did it. The merger with Isabella and James's tech startup is official. And you'll never guess who showed up to give their blessing." Before Sophia could respond, the sound of familiar voices drifted in from the living room. Her eyes widened in surprise as she recognized Mrs. Chen's laughter mingling with Richard Wright's booming chuckle. "They're here? Both of them?" Sophia whispered, a hint of apprehension in her voice. Marcus nodded, his expression softening. "They've come a long way, Sophia. We all have." As they made their way to the living room, the scene that greeted them was one Sophia could have never imagined years ago. Mrs. Chun was on the floor, Her usually impeccable suit slightly rumpled as she helped Arya build a tower of blocks. Richard Wright sat nearby, regaling a wide-eyed Matteo with what sounded suspiciously like embellished tales of his business exploits. "Ah, there you are," Richard boomed, catching sight of them. "Sophia, my dear, I hope you don't mind us dropping in unannounced. We brought wine." He held up a bottle of what Sophia recognized as an extremely rare vintage. Mrs. Chun stood, smoothing her suit. "We wanted to congratulate you both in person. The merger. It's a testament to how far we've all come." Sophia felt a lump form in her throat. The road to this moment had been far from smooth. There had been tense family dinners, heated arguments about business decisions, and moments when old wounds threatened to reopen. But through it all, they had persevered, slowly building bridges and redefining what family meant to all of them. "We're so glad you're here," Sophia said warmly. "Dinner's almost ready. Why don't we all sit down together?" As they gathered around the large dining table, a wedding gift from Antonio, who was sadly no longer with them, Sophia marveled at the unlikely family they had created. Isabella and James arrived shortly after, adding their own excited chatter about the merger's success. Midway through the meal, as laughter and conversation flowed freely, Marcus clinked his glass for attention. "I'd like to propose a toast," he began, his eyes meeting Sophia's. "To family, the one we were born into, the one we chose, and the one we've built together. To second chances and new beginnings, and to love that conquers all," Sophia added softly, raising her glass. As everyone echoed the sentiment, Sophia felt a familiar flutter in her stomach. She caught Marcus's eye, a silent question passing between them. With a subtle nod, he squeezed her hand under the table. Sophia took a deep breath. "Actually, we have one more piece of news to share." All eyes turned to her, curiosity piqued. "It seems our family is about to get a little bigger. We're expecting again." The room erupted in a chorus of congratulations and excited exclamations. As hugs were exchanged and plans for the future began to take shape, Sophia felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. Looking around at the faces of those gathered, her children, her husband, the in-laws who had become true family, and friends who had stood by them through it all, Sophia realized that this was more than just a happy ending. It was a beautiful beginning, filled with endless possibilities and the promise of more love, more challenges, and more growth to come. As the evening wore on and plans for the future were enthusiastically discussed, Sophia caught Marcus's eye across the table. In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of their blended family, they shared a silent acknowledgement of how far they'd come and an excited anticipation for all that lay ahead. Their story, with all its twists and turns, was far from over. In fact, the most exciting chapters were just beginning to unfold. "Mama, can I feel the baby kick again?" Arya asked, her eyes wide with excitement. Sophia smiled, guiding her daughter's small hand to a spot where the baby was particularly active. "There. Can you feel it?" Arya's face lit up with wonder. "It's like she's dancing in there." Marcus chuckled as he entered the room, Matteo trailing behind him with a toy stethoscope. "I thought we agreed to be surprised this time." Sophia shot him a mischievous look. Mother's intuition. As the family gathered around, each taking turns feeling the baby's movements, the doorbell rang. Marcus went to answer it, returning moments later with a surprise visitor. "Rose!" Sophia exclaimed, attempting to stand but finding it a bit challenging. The older woman rushed to her side, enveloping her in a warm hug. "Oh, look at you!" Absolutely glowing, Rose had become an honorary grandmother to the twins, and her presence always brought a sense of comfort and nostalgia. She had been there through it all, the dramatic wedding interruption, the revelations, the rebuilding of relationships. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by," Rose said, producing a carefully wrapped package. "I found this and thought of you." Sophia unwrapped it to find a beautifully preserved cookbook. Her breath caught as she recognized her grandmother's handwriting on the cover. "Rose, how did you?" "Your abuela and I kept in touch over the years," Rose explained, her eyes twinkling. "She wanted you to have this when the time was right. I think now, as you're about to welcome another little one, is perfect. Tears welled in Sophia's eyes as she flipped through the pages, filled with family recipes and handwritten notes. It was a tangible connection to her past, a bridge between generations. As the afternoon wore on, the house filled with the aroma of Sophia's cooking, a recipe from her grandmother's book. The family gathered in the kitchen, sharing stories and laughter. Suddenly, Sophia gasped, her hand flying to her stomach. "Sophia?" Marcus was at her side in an instant, concern etched on his face. I think it's time," Sophia managed between breaths. The room erupted into controlled chaos. Rose took charge of the twins, while Marcus helped Sophia to the car. As they rushed to the hospital, Sophia couldn't help but laugh at the parallel to the twins' dramatic entrance into the world. "At least this time we're actually headed to the hospital," she joked weakly, squeezing Marcus's hand. Hours later, in a quiet hospital room, Sophia cradled their newborn daughter. Marcus sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders, both of them in awe of the tiny life they'd created. "She's perfect," Marcus whispered, gently stroking the baby's cheek. Sophia nodded, overcome with emotion. "Welcome to the world, Elena Rose Chun Martinez." As if on cue, there was a soft knock at the door. Rose peeked in, leading Aria and Mateo by the hand. Behind them, Mrs. Chan and Richard Wright stood, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Come in," Sophia called softly. "Come meet the newest member of our family." As the room filled with loved ones, some related by blood, others by choice, Sophia felt a profound sense of completion. This child, born into a family that had overcome so much, represented all their hopes and dreams for the future. Mrs. Chun approached the bed, her usual composure softened by the sight of her new granddaughter. "She's beautiful," she murmured, "just like her mother." Richard cleared his throat, clearly emotional. "Well, I suppose this calls for a celebration. Perhaps a new trust fund?" "Dad," Marcus warned gently, but with a smile. As the family cooed over baby Elena, Sophia caught Marcus's eye. In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of their blended family, they shared a look of pure joy and understanding. Their journey had been far from conventional, filled with twists, turns, and unexpected revelations. But as Sophia looked around the room at the faces of those she loved most in the world, she knew that every challenge, every heartache, had led them exactly where they were meant to be. The Chun Martinez family saga was far from over. In fact, with little Elena's arrival, it felt like a brand new chapter was just beginning, one filled with promise, love, and the unbreakable bonds of a family forged through adversity and strengthened by unconditional love. As the sun set outside the hospital window, casting a warm glow over the gathered family, Sophia knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together, united, stronger than ever, and ready for whatever adventures lay ahead. The sound of the door swinging open caught her attention. Elena, now a vivacious teenager with Sophia's curls and Marcus's determined gaze, burst in. "Mom, you won't believe what happened at school today," she exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Sophia wiped her hands on her apron, giving her youngest daughter her full attention. "What is it, Mija?" Before Elena could launch into her story, Aria and Mateo, now in their early 20s, entered the kitchen, playfully bickering as usual. "I'm telling you, Matt, the new fusion menu needs more spice," Aria insisted, her culinary instincts as sharp as her mother's. Mateo rolled his eyes good-naturedly. "And I'm saying we need to balance flavors, not set our customers' mouths on fire." Sophia chuckled, feeling a surge of pride at her children's passion for the family business. "All right, you two. We'll discuss menu changes at the family meeting tonight. Now, Elena, what's your news?" Elena took a deep breath, her excitement palpable. "I've been selected for the International Youth Chef Competition in Paris. Can you believe it?" The kitchen erupted in cheers and congratulations. Sophia pulled her daughter into a tight hug, feeling a mix of pride and a twinge of nostalgia. It seemed like only yesterday that Elena was taking her first steps in this very kitchen. As the family celebrated, Marcus appeared in the doorway, a mysterious smile playing on his lips. I hope I'm not interrupting, but I have some news of my own. All eyes turned to him expectantly. I just got off the phone with Isabella and James, he began, pausing for dramatic effect. The tech startup we invested in last year is being acquired by a major Silicon Valley firm. We're talking multi-million-dollar deal here. The kitchen erupted once again, this time with shocked gasps and excited chatter. Sophia felt her heart swell with pride and gratitude. Their family's journey had been filled with ups and downs, but moments like these made it all worthwhile. As the initial excitement settled, Sophia noticed a flicker of something in Marcus's eyes, a hint of uncertainty that she recognized all too well. There's more, isn't there? She asked softly, stepping closer to her husband. Marcus nodded, taking a deep breath. The acquiring company, they want me to oversee the merger. It would mean relocating to California for at least a year. A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. The implications of this news hung in the air. A potential separation, a disruption to the life they'd built together. Arya was the first to speak up. But what about the restaurant empire? The expansion plans? Matteo chimed in, his voice tinged with concern. And Elena's competition? We can't miss that. Elena, unusually quiet, looked between her parents. What are we going to do? Sophia felt a familiar flutter of anxiety in her stomach, reminiscent of those tumultuous days years ago when their family was just beginning. But as she looked around at the faces of her children, strong, capable, and so full of love, she felt a surge of confidence. We'll do what we've always done, she said, her voice steady and warm. We'll face it together as a family. Marcus squeezed her hand, gratitude shining in his eyes. I haven't given them an answer yet. This is a decision we need to make together, all of us. As the family began to discuss the possibilities, weighing pros and cons, Sophia was struck by how far they'd come. The challenges they faced now were so different from those early days of secret pregnancies and family scandals. Yet the foundation they'd built, one of love, trust, and unwavering support, remained unshakable. The kitchen, once just a place of work, had become the heart of their family's story. It was where dreams were born, challenges were faced, and love was nurtured through the simple act of breaking bread together. As the discussion continued, filled with passionate arguments and creative problem-solving, Sophia caught Marcus's eye across the room. In that moment, they shared a silent understanding whatever path they chose, they would walk it side by side, just as they had for all these years. The Chamartinez saga was far from over. In fact, it felt like they were on the brink of a whole new chapter, one filled with exciting opportunities, difficult choices, and the promise of even greater adventures to come. As the sun began to set outside, casting a warm glow through the kitchen windows, Sophia felt a sense of anticipation building. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew that together, their family could overcome anything. The best was yet to come. Sophia took a deep breath, inhaling the unfamiliar scent of eucalyptus and sea salt. Well, here we are, she said, her voice a mix of excitement and apprehension. Marcus squeezed her hand, his eyes reflecting a similar blend of emotions. Together, remember? As they began to unload the moving truck, each family member lost in their own thoughts. A sleek sports car pulled up to the curb. Isabella and James stepped out, their faces breaking into wide grins. Welcome to the neighborhood, Isabella called out, rushing to embrace Sophia. The reunion was filled with laughter and excited chatter as the two families caught up. It had been Isabella and James who had ultimately convinced the Chamartinez clan to make the move, promising to help smooth the transition. As the adults talked, Elena wandered to the edge of the property, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Matteo joined her, nudging her shoulder gently. Penny for your thoughts, little sis? Elena sighed, her voice uncharacteristically small. Do you think I made the right choice? Postponing the competition to come here? Matteo wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Hey, the culinary world isn't going anywhere. And who knows? Maybe you'll discover some amazing fusion of Silicon Valley tech and your cooking genius. Their conversation was interrupted by Arya's excited shout. Guys, "Come quick. You've got to see this." The family gathered in what would become their new kitchen. Sophia's jaw dropped as she took in the state-of-the-art appliances and sprawling counter space. "It's incredible," she breathed, her fingers trailing over the smooth surfaces. James grinned, clearly pleased with their reaction. "We thought you might like it. Consider it a welcome gift and an investment in future culinary innovations." As the family explored their new home, Sophia couldn't help but feel a pang of nostalgia for their old life. The thought of her restaurant back in New York, now under the temporary management of her trusted sous chef, made her heart ache. Later that evening, as they sat around a hastily assembled dinner table, the reality of their new situation began to sink in. The conversation flowed, touching on Marcus's upcoming role in the merger, the children's new schools, and Sophia's plans for potentially expanding her culinary empire to the West Coast. Suddenly, Elena cleared her throat, drawing everyone's attention. I have something to tell you all," she began, her voice trembling slightly. The room fell silent, all eyes on the youngest Chen Martinez. "I've been offered an apprenticeship," Elena continued, her words gaining strength, "with Chef Emilia Rodriguez." Sophia gasped, recognizing the name of one of the most innovative chefs in modern cuisine. "But honey, she's based in Tokyo," Elena finished. "I know it's far, and the timing isn't great with the move and everything, but..." Her eyes shone with a mixture of hope and determination. This could be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken emotions. Sophia and Marcus exchanged a look, years of shared experiences and silent communication, allowing them to have an entire conversation without words. Finally, Marcus spoke. "Elena, this is a big decision, one that affects all of us." But he paused, a proud smile spreading across his face. "If this is what you truly want, we'll find a way to make it work." Sophia nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Your dreams are just as important as ours, Mija. We'll support you always." As the family rallied around Elena, discussing logistics and